Hey there. So, we're back in Blender. I know. These videos don't typically do very well, but I've just been obsessed with this as of the past 2 days now. I've been working with planetary renders, like astronomy style renders, and it's a lot of fun. And I just want to keep doing it. And I needed to record a video today, so I figured I'd kill two birds with one stone and just do a video on this. I mean, if this is something you're not really interested in, then I mean, all the more reason to watch it to fall asleep. This would put you asleep instantaneously if you're not into it. But yeah, that's all we're going to be doing. I'm just going to be tweaking stuff, mostly the clouds. I'm trying to get the clouds to look better. This isn't really meant to be a tutorial or anything, so I mean, feel free to follow along, I guess, if you're interested. I will be just kind of rambling through what I'm doing just for the ASMR quality of the video. But yeah, it's not really meant to be a tutorial, so you're not really going to learn anything from this video. Anyway, yeah, let's just get started, I guess. So I'm trying to do everything procedural. Obviously, you can just find NASA has images of cloud scans, but I'm trying to get this to be procedural and to get it to look good because just kind of for the fun of it, somewhat for the challenge, I suppose, of making something procedural look good. But also, with procedural textures comes a bit more control, especially for animations, I would say, because while those big scans of real clouds exist, I don't know that there's any animated scans. I don't know if that would even be possible because as far as I understand it, those scans are composites of multiple satellite images taken over a course of time. So it's not like, we can't just scan the entire Earth for clouds over an extended period of time, in order to get that animation. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not 100% sure. Maybe there are animated cloud images that you can source online, but we're going the procedural route, so let's see what we can do. Let's just get an idea of what the clouds are looking like. You can't really, unfortunately, get a perfect idea of what they're looking like unless you render, just because we're using, in order to make the clouds look good, you have to use, I suppose you don't have to use, but I would argue it's of vital importance that you use the experimental feature set so that you can use adaptive subdivision. As you can see here in the viewport, it's 1/8 resolution of the render, so you just can't get a good idea of what the clouds are going to look like until you actually do a full render. I'm actually going to turn down that a little bit because we don't need it to be that high for an up-close render. Yeah, we'll see how this goes. Hopefully it doesn't crash. I've been rendering these out for a while now, but I have never done it while recording with OBS, obviously, so I'm a little worried that with OBS running, it might have some problems, but we'll see. So far, so good. But yeah, the thing that adaptive subdivision does is that based on the amount of screen space that a particular polygon takes up, it gets subdivided into smaller polygons. Again, that's not really necessarily anything you can't do without adaptive subdivision. You could just subdivide this material a bunch of times and just have this fine of a resolution of a mesh. But the problem with that is that when working on a global scale, I don't know exactly, but I'm just going to throw out a ballpark and say only 10% of the entire sphere of the Earth is even visible in this render. So if you subdivide the mesh so that this 10% has this level of quality, you're going to be wasting a lot of computational power on the rest of the mesh that's not being seen. But there we go, finished render. We didn't crash, so that's good. So right now I've got 2 cloud layers. I'm kind of trying to simulate, you've got your higher altitude cirrus clouds like this over here. You see they're a bit stringier. And then you've got your lower altitude cumulus clouds down here, which are these chunkier clouds. I'm going to be focusing on the cumulus clouds right now, trying to get those to be a little bit better. But who knows? We might touch into the cirrus clouds. So that's what they're looking like right now. We're using, obviously we're using noise textures with pretty high detail, which is essentially like the resolution of the texture, although it doesn't have a strict resolution as you would consider it with like an image texture, which is another benefit of using a procedural texture rather than, a high quality scan. Now, I mean, to be fair, there are high enough resolution scans out there that, you'll never need to, go higher than that. They're perfectly adequate. But, I mean, technically speaking, this noise texture has essentially an infinite resolution. But the problem is that when you have so many of them, especially the ground, our procedural ground it uses more noise textures. In fact, I'm going to turn that off for now because that'll help speed things up. That's a bit better. And to make this easier to see, let's just go and do this. All right. So, what are we looking for? When you look at pictures of clouds, I should have pulled up some reference. I guess I still can. All right, so you've got these swirls because, like clouds are subject to air currents and stuff like that. And so a lot of them, there's a lot of like swirliness to them. So I really want to replicate that. Also, I would say the coverage on this image of clouds is quite high. There's quite a large coverage. But while there are some large swaths of clouds, I would say most of the coverage is relatively small clumps of clouds, kind of stringiness, which is probably, I mean, I'm not a meteorologist, so I don't know for sure. I venture to guess that that's because of like, cold fronts, warm fronts, different temperature air. Obviously, we aren't simulating clouds. We're just trying to replicate them in appearance. So right now, the setup we have is extremely rudimentary. It's being driven by a single noise texture. But like I said, what we have right now it's not terrible, but it's not good. You do kind of get some of that swirliness in some of these, but we don't have as broad of coverage, and we have a lot more of like a blotchiness. Now I could turn up the scale to get, a greater amount of coverage with smaller islands, I guess I'll call them, but it just doesn't look quite right. It's a little too uniform, I feel like. The real world is a little more chaotic, and I feel like this is very clearly like derived from random noise than being like something that looks real. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to fix this. We can control this to like control like the contrast of the clouds is how I'm controlling that. What I could do is get another noise texture. All right, so now we've added these, and if we make this one smaller, or actually no, we want to go bigger, we can get kind of both, where we have the large swaths, but we also have the smaller islands in between. But again, it's a little too uniform. What we could do is do this. So we set this to multiply, and then we can set this down to a lower value so that, we're kind of blocking out some of those. We might need to get a map range in here. I feel like that looks pretty cloud-like, but it's kind of on its own in terms of like realism. So we can adjust the like overall coverage with this noise map. And this one probably doesn't need to be this detailed, honestly. We could take this down to like 3 or something. Okay, we can't go that low. Let's see. 4. No. 5. Probably not. All right, 6 might be the lowest. I'm willing to go on that one. We will definitely need to go higher because the detail, like I said, detail is essentially your resolution, and that vastly impacts the displacement that you end up doing for the final render. So if you don't use a higher detail amount, I think I had it at 12, yeah, then you don't get that fine mesh resolution that you want. Then let's take another map range, put it there. So now we can adjust the scale of this to adjust the overall coverage, so we can have more or less gaps in between. It's still not looking super cloud-like. I wonder if changing the distortion on this would get better results. Problem is that the distortion, it does kind of get what we want, where it has that swirliness, you know, but it also kind of just stretches out the texture, which does look a little wonky, I think, in certain areas. Let's work with this just one at a time. So this is currently what we're working with the smaller scale clouds. I feel like we'll need to go higher with this. Otherwise it just doesn't look right. So in terms of distortion, I mean, if you go too high, I feel like it just starts to become obvious that it's just random noise. It just doesn't look right. But if you go too low, it also doesn't look like clouds. You have to have a little bit of distortion at least. Offset, it's just like, it just pushes the value in one direction or the other. So we don't need to worry about that. I honestly don't know what this does. I mean, obviously I can see that it like affects the detail, but I'm not actually sure what this does. If you go too high with this, it starts to become really obvious that it's just like a bunch of noise, right? It's just a bunch of dots. And if you go too low, then it just becomes blobs. So we need some of this at least. It's set to, I think, 2 by default. I have it at 2.51. Honestly, that probably seems like a pretty good value. Let's see what trying different types of noise will do. Some hybrid multifractal. Doesn't look good, but maybe there's something we can do to fix that. This one has very sharp lines, which doesn't look good for clouds. So we're probably not going to be using this one. Let's try rigid multifractal. Let's just see what this one is doing on its own. So that's what this one looks like on its own. I feel like there's clouds in there somewhere. You just got to get them out somehow. You do get some of these sharp lines though, like there. Kind of has like a Mandelbrot fractal type of look in certain areas. But these areas in between that you can see there, if I do that, we can zoom in a little closer. I feel like that has a certain cloud-like quality that you see with certain areas of clouds. So like, kind of like in here, you know, where you get that like repeating checkerboard cloud kind of thing, kind of like in there somewhat. I feel like it's got kind of part of that vibe, you know? So potentially you could use this somehow. What if we turn the distortion down? Maybe distortion ruins this one. Obviously that doesn't look very cloud-like, but maybe we take the scale down. Turn up the roughness maybe. Yeah, can you go higher than 1? You can go higher than 1, although it doesn't really do much for us in this case. What if we go higher with the detail? Let's go like 8, 9. I mean, it's like, it's kind of there, honestly. I feel like it's kind of there. It has a certain cloudiness to it. We really want to avoid those harsh lines. So here, let's do another map range and see what we've got. Okay, it's a little bit different. So color and factor are a little bit different. So if we clamp that down a little bit, and then maybe, I don't like how there's like this milkiness to it, although maybe that's all right actually. We'll clamp it down just a little bit more. On these bigger clumps, there will still be some of that, but honestly, I don't think that's too bad. What happens if we add a little bit of distortion? I think a little bit of distortion is good, actually. Not too much. You don't want to add too much. Ooh, I kind of like that, honestly. I kind of like that. I feel like that's slightly too much distortion. Let's go 0.35 with it. Just enough to kind of, you know, you kind of get that idea of like certain areas of the clouds are all being warped in the same direction. It's kind of like an air current type of feel. You know, you can feel the stretch, but it's not so much that it's like clearly just like an arbitrary stretching, you know. All right, so what does this look like if we mix it with the other one from before? Is that even necessary at this point? So obviously our coverage goes way down because that was the whole point. We could also adjust this. And no, I don't think that's super necessary anymore. I mean, this one on its own, I feel like it already kind of has pretty good contrast, honestly. And I mean, from the reference image, we have lots of clouds here. So, you know, it's not the worst thing in the world to have a lot of clouds. There are areas, obviously, that don't have very many clouds. And that's honestly influenced a lot by like the underlying, terrain. So right here you can see that there's not a lot of clouds over the Sahara Desert because the Sahara Desert is very dry. Our underlying ground texture does have like areas of desert, but using that to inform the clouds would be very challenging. I don't think it'd be impossible, but it's beyond the scope of what I'm capable of. So we're just kind of going pure random on this one. But honestly, that doesn't look too bad, I feel like. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of that then. We can get rid of that, and we can get rid of that. So now if we add these to our original clouds, what does it look like? That's what we get. Did we make this smaller? We did, I guess. This is supposed to be bigger. I think that's what was throwing me off. So now we've got these big clumps of clouds and some smaller clumps as well. I don't think that looks too bad. Let's plug that into the alpha. Plug that into here. Although this is clamped, so that might end up looking wrong because there's going to be large flat areas, I think. But we're gonna render this out and see what it looks like. We're gonna do a quick test. We've got a large swath of the new clouds there. We've got the old clouds, so it'll be a good test to see what we're working with here. So we were clamping the information going into the displacement node, which makes me think that it's going to be flat, and it looks like it is. Which, with clouds is not necessarily always a bad thing, because clouds, exist in layers of the atmosphere, and you will very frequently see clouds with flat properties, but this is a little too flat. It's not quite what we're going for. It doesn't look quite right, in my opinion. And the thing is that even though clouds do exhibit, a certain level of flatness to some degree, it isn't quite like this. There are layers of the atmosphere that clouds will not pass, but they don't just like cut off flat, because what's happening here is the texture is telling the displacement node, we have values of, it probably goes negative, but let's just say we have values of 0, which mean no displacement, and then we have values of, let's say, 2 to mean maximum displacement. But because we're clamping it within a 0 to 1 range, so anything over 1 gets clamped to 1, which is why it's all flat. So anywhere that's flat here is a space where the value of displacement was greater than 1. We do not want to clamp it, but what we will do is, I think the minimum should be around 0, and we have 2 textures here where we are clamping them beforehand. So unclamping this might actually not matter. So what we might need to do, we might need to use a different add node, unclamp this one, and then use this one to drive this one. And then I think our maximum, so from our maximum, it should be 2. I think, I don't know, I'm not 100% sure. Although this has a gain of 32, so that probably affects it. So, I don't know, let's just go to like 5 or something. So what this is basically going to do is, so it's going to, it gets this value, which is from these 2 texture maps. And then it's basically going to say that it's going to remap those textures so that you have your spectrum of values from 0 to 5 in this case, and they're going to get compressed down from 0 to 1. I'm pretty sure that's how that works. Hopefully that's how that works. So let's go ahead and render that and see what that looks like. We're probably going to need to tweak that from maximum value, because I'm just kind of guessing. I'm not exactly sure what the maximum actually is. There's probably a way to mathematically know for certain, but we're just gonna eyeball it. Definitely seems like I've gotten it wrong. We should probably also turn off the cirrus clouds so that they're not interfering with the render. It's just kind of hard to tell what's what here. Obviously we've got cirrus clouds all through here, although I think some of these underlying ones are part of the new clouds that we just added. These are the cumulus clouds that we've been working on, although these are the old ones that were already there. We no longer have that flatness from the cutoff, but because we've compressed that spectrum of values, it was originally in our case 0 to 5. We've compressed that down to 0 to 1. So we have shrunk the overall intensity of the displacement, which leads to a slightly smoother cloud mesh, which I'm not a huge fan of. I really liked the really bumpy clouds. I mean, we could just try it unclamped, see what happens. It's probably going to be really spiky because there's going to be areas that are like, a value of 5. So they're going to spike up 5 times as high. Not exactly sure. But we're going to do that. And we're also going to turn off the cirrus clouds so that we know that all the clouds that we're looking at are from the clouds that we just worked on. The render times are not the fastest, unfortunately. 1 minute 43 is a little bit slower than I'd prefer, honestly. But when you're working with the volumetrics, it's always going to be a little bit slower. All right, so we've captured back all of that information. And actually, you know what? That doesn't look too bad. The places where they overlap just become bigger clouds, right? Which adds a little bit of variation, for one. And for two, I mean, that's not necessarily completely unrealistic, So the clouds that I've been working on are meant to be like cumulus clouds, but you also have cumulonimbus clouds that are much larger and actually span a greater number of layers of the atmosphere. So, potentially we're kind of replicating that. These areas right here, these are part of the new clouds we just did. I think that looks really good. That looks pretty good. I like that. It definitely has that vibe that you get with certain cloud formations. Yeah, that's not too bad, honestly. I mean, maybe we don't even put this through a map range. Maybe we just plug the add straight into the displacement. I think if you leave a map range unclamped with the default settings, I don't think it actually changes anything. So this theoretically shouldn't change anything, but we're just going to see what happens. So yeah, I mean, what we were working with originally was cumulus. Then you have the cirrus clouds, which are the other ones that I've kind of tried to make. The ones that we just recently added to the cumulus, I feel like are kind of altocumulus or maybe even cirrocumulus, where it kind of has that, that blotchy pattern. Obviously, this isn't scientific by any means. Again, we're not simulating anything. So they're all at the same layer, which apparently isn't possible. But the places where they overlap, they kind of turn into cumulonimbus clouds in a way, because it adds that height. I do feel like there's a little bit of flatness in here that wasn't present before. I don't know, am I crazy? Let's just double check that. I guess it was. I guess that's just the way it was. I don't know. I thought it had a bit more to it than that. Let's get a different camera angle here. Yeah, I think that actually looks pretty good, honestly. I do like these newer formations. I might actually turn up the contrast on these bigger clumps. I'm starting to think that they just don't look quite right. I don't know. I mean, like I said, the bigger clumps do exist, but I feel like they don't look quite like what I've got going on here. Or maybe I should actually reduce the contrast. Might create more of like a wispier look. Maybe that's the secret. I've been trying to avoid that, but maybe that's what I need. We don't really get that wispiness though, like we do with the rigid multifractal. For this one, we're using heteroterrain. I'm not exactly sure. What happens if we set this to 0? It's not really wispiness like with the other one. What I'm thinking is, if we duplicate this texture, we keep all the parameters the same, but if we add it back to itself, it'll obviously be the same thing. But we haven't adjusted the contrast on the second one, so you'll get the wispiness back. But my idea is that if we turn down the roughness, we do kind of get some of that wispiness back. But the problem is that now it follows this weird contour. It doesn't look quite right. I mean, that kind of works. So if you turn up the roughness. Ooh, hold on, we might be getting somewhere. Does that look better or worse? I don't know, does that look really stupid? And what happens if we clamp that? I don't know if we're gonna want to clamp that. because then we run into the same problems as before. The difference is incredibly minor, although just because it's not super easy to see doesn't mean it won't make a difference for displacement especially. It's very touchy. Hey, look, a butterfly. And this one's a T-Rex with its mouth open. You see it? I'm literally looking at the clouds, looking at shapes in the clouds. I think that could work, honestly. Let's see. Let's try to dial this in a little bit. We don't want it to be too sharp. What if we turn up the detail? So the thing about detail is that on its own, it doesn't just like, I guess technically it does, but the detail only matters if you have the roughness to warrant it. If you go down to 0 roughness, it doesn't matter how detailed you make it. It doesn't make a difference. It looks like we can't get much more than 6 out of it at this roughness. Ideally, we want this to only be wispy in like one direction. If we go to our reference, you'll see the wispiness. It's like it's being drawn out from the bulk of the clouds in a particular direction. That's what we're trying to replicate. Just get a quick preview. That's not bad. I don't hate that. I don't think that looks too bad. I'm almost wondering if it's like even worth having the 2 types though. It looks all right from this angle. Let's make sure. I mean, you can kind of see it. The thing is that because the clouds are like pretty much pure white, and they have a lot of subsurface. You can't really see the 3-dimensional detail of the clouds when the light is coming from directly above them. You can really only see it when, they're at an angle to the sun, which is why most of the renders I make are on the seam between the light and dark side of the planet, just because that's where all the interesting lighting happens. Let's take a look. Now, they don't seem as 3-dimensional as I would prefer. That looks more like what we were looking for. They look a little bit puffier, cloudier, a little bit more 3-dimensional. Although those look pretty flat. This clump of clouds looks pretty flat. This looks fine. That looks bad. And the clouds are gone. All right, so that, as it turns out, doesn't work. But those look quite good. Those look even better than they did before. They are quite a bit taller, though. I think they're reaching out of the atmosphere, actually. So those are too large. The detail is too high. But the detail was present, at the very least. So we can work with that. I guess it's because when these are unclamped, there's negative values. What if we raise the minimum? That looks kind of interesting. Those are some very large cloud formations. A little bit too much coverage, if I'm being honest. But overall, I actually don't hate how that looks. So let's pull this down. We got to incrementally do this. When you affect these 2, they look great. I really like how those look. But then you affect this one, it's just like a big blob. That looks pretty good though, honestly. I mean, like, there's a certain element to this one that I like. I just don't like, it's just a bunch of large splotches. I really like how some of these areas look though, like this right here. My mouse is so laggy. This right here, this like area looks great. I feel like I'm getting away from it. I feel like I'm losing it a little bit. I'm going to be honest. This might be a mistake. I think I might be making a mistake. Good thing I've been recording all of this though, so at any time I can always just go back and see where I went wrong and just revert everything back. Yeah, I mean, there's certain areas that look really good, and then there's certain areas that just look really dumb. All right. We're going pure experimentation right now. We've completely abandoned everything we've been working on, and we're going pure experimentation. What if we distort this? We get some interesting shapes. Ooh, that's interesting. I don't know if I really love how that looks. These areas where it's really stretched from the aggressive distortion doesn't look super great to me. But overall, that's not too bad. I have no idea what I'm doing, by the way. I am literally just adjusting sliders. It's like when you were like creating a character in a Bethesda game and you're just maxing out all the sliders. That's what I'm doing right now. All right, so what if we turn this one down? Okay, this actually, I might be getting somewhere. We have much more interesting shapes now, I would say. And I feel like we have a little bit more control over like the general look. This is pretty interesting. I don't hate, look at this. Look at that right there. That looks like some clouds right here. This looks like there's a front moving in. That looks pretty good. Honestly, I'm liking where we're at. I like this more than where we were. But we're gonna try this. We're gonna see what that looks like. I'm interested. I'm interested to see what this ends up being. We're gonna leave the displacement the same. I think the clouds are gonna be too big, but we're gonna find out. We're gonna save. We're gonna render. Hopefully it doesn't crash. It's tessellating. All right, it tessellated. And it's rendering. Okay, interesting. It actually doesn't look as bad as I was worried it was going to look. There are areas here that are very tall, obviously. But again, you know, as long as we're pretending to base it off something, we could pretend that those are cumulonimbus clouds, right? So these areas where it gets very tall, those are cumulonimbus maybe. We do, okay, let's see, we can kind of see it here. All right, we might need to scale it down just a hair. They are reaching pretty high. I mean, if this is like, I mean, I don't know though. I mean, how high? Okay. It's definitely too tall. Okay, so they need to be smaller. Let's just see what happens when we turn down the scale. So we're at 0009. So let's go 00045. So they'll be half as tall. What I'm worried about is that the small ones are going to be really small now, but we'll see. As a side note, I love the look of the desert underneath there. It just looks so cool. Deserts suck, just as places in general, because they're like, you know, inhospitable. But in terms of like aesthetics, they look very cool. They're a little smooth maybe, and I could probably fix that. I didn't check in the last render. I didn't look into the horizon to see how tall they were, but I didn't see anything out of like the corner of my eye that struck me as wrong. So we have to wait till it denoises to get like a really good idea of what it looks like. I think that looks pretty good. That might be it. Although I'm starting to notice that the clouds are still pretty tall. There's some peaks over there, and there's a peak right there that's quite tall. Quite tall. So maybe we turn it down just a smidge more, maybe. I don't know, I don't really want to. I love the three-dimensionality of the clouds, you know? I love that volume, that depth. But that just, right there, that just looks a little too tall, I think. I don't know, I mean, honestly, it isn't so much the height, but it's the fact that it spikes in the one spot. But I mean, if we look at the reference, we go back to the reference, I mean, look, there's a spike right there. I mean, this whole cloud is pretty vertical in general. It's certainly not just because it's part of a diagram. I will use whatever I have to cope with the fact that my render isn't perfect. I don't know, I'll admit, I don't like that. I don't like that one little spike. You do have to also consider the fact that the scale of the clouds vastly affects the perception of the scale of the planet, right? If the clouds look really big, then the planet will look very small, and vice versa. So by making the clouds a little bit less voluminous, we do potentially make the planet look a little bit bigger, which is a nice benefit, I suppose. Honestly, maybe I'm kind of swaying myself. I don't know, maybe it works out better when it's like that. I don't know. Which one looks better? Higher or shorter? Interestingly, I would absolutely say the shorter clouds make the planet look significantly bigger. This planet looks significantly smaller than this planet, which is kind of interesting. But I'd be lying if I said that I didn't like the shadows that the taller clouds cast. I don't know. I don't know. Let's try one more thing. Let's just try it for the sake of experimentation. Let's try one more thing. What if we do this? We do power. Plug that into that, that into that. Let's try this. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm in way over my head at this point, but we're going to try. So let's do like a 0.8. This could end up being like insane. This could ruin everything. I mean, obviously it's easy enough to just delete that one node, but I literally have no idea what to expect here. Okay, so it seems that we've just completely flattened all of the clouds. That did not have the effect that we were after. I mean, I suppose it did flatten the clouds, which was essentially what we were trying to do, but it didn't have the nuanced approach that we were after. Is the idea sound at all? Like, did this not work because the idea and the execution are just garbage? Or did it not work because I just put the wrong value in, you know? I'm not sure. Let's try a different value. Let's go in the other direction. Let's go 0.3. I think that's going to make the clouds taller, but actually I don't know. Okay, well that's interesting. That is interesting. We learned something. We got some information here. So what we learned is it is having basically the effect that we want. We're just going to have to dial it in, because what I'm seeing here is that this is potentially pulling up from the tallest areas, although if I'm looking at like actually where these are coming from, it might be doing the opposite. It might be pulling them from the shortest areas. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking we do this. Boom. Now again, this might be a terrible, terrible idea, but we won't know until we hit F12. Okay, so we don't have huge spikes. I think that might be doing what we want, actually. I might have figured it out. I might not be the biggest idiot to have ever lived. I am noticing an interesting issue, though, which is I think the clouds as a whole are higher off the ground. Like the starting point, like the bottom of the clouds is higher off the ground than they were before. I'm not 100% sure. I am going to check that after this is done rendering, but it kind of looks that way. So, do we go up or down? I'm going to be honest, I literally have no idea. So we're going to do trial and error. We're going to go up first and then down after. So let's go 0.8. Come on. First try. Ooh, I think that might be it. Yeah, I think that's it. Let's see. It's hard to tell. I think the spike is right there. It should still be there a little bit. It should just be diminished. That was the whole idea. We wanted it to be a little bit more diminished without having to sacrifice the overall fluffiness of the clouds as a whole. Honestly, we might be able to push it just a little bit further. I think we can push it just a little bit further. What if we go like 0.95? Get as much depth out of a majority of the clouds as possible, and then hopefully it should only just barely affect the absolute peaks, but it will hopefully be enough to bring that spike into check so we get the absolute best of both worlds. That's what I'm hoping. Although I'm starting to see the spike already. I can see it right there. There's two. One there. So it might not have worked to a sufficient degree. So ideally what this should do is it should affect the bulk of the clouds even less than before, while pulling the tips of the highest spikes, the highest peaks, as much as possible. Although I'm already seeing, when you can see the spikes before the denoising step, they're going to be tall. Let's see what happens when we add the cirrus clouds onto there. Yeah, most of the cirrus clouds look like trash. Like this over here looks pretty bad in my opinion. These don't look too terrible, but I really like this one. That's a nice cloud right there. And honestly, these up here as well, those don't look too bad. I like that one a lot. Look at how wispy this cloud looks. It looks like a cloud. Yeah, I think that's probably gonna do it for this video. I've been doing this for a while now. Um, I mean, I'm not even close to being done. I'm gonna continue to work on this, obviously, but as far as the video is concerned, I'm gonna have to edit this down significantly. So I'm just gonna end it right here. 2.5 hours in. I don't know what I'm gonna edit this down to, but we'll see. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope that if you were watching this to fall asleep, you managed to do so. I imagine it probably wasn't that challenging. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I will catch you later.